What if I told you that the same food or activity could send my wife's blood sugar spiking like crazy while barely nudging mine? Fasting blood sugar is what, around between 75 to maybe 90 or so. Kathy's peaked to 202 milligram per deciliter. That was a significant spike. So let's zoom out a little bit and look at some of the top categories that caused spikes for us. For me, the absolute highest spike was... Welcome to the Primal Shift podcast. What if I told you that the same food or activity could send my wife's blood sugar spiking like crazy while barely nudging mine, or vice versa? Actually, some cases where mine spiked like crazy and yours did not. That's actually was a very fun activity. But in today's episode, I have here my wife and data co-pilot Kathy, and we conducted an experiment. We wore a continuous glucose monitor, the Dexcom G7, for a couple of weeks, paired with the Levels Health app to get all the good data insights and correlations and all the tracking. And we wanted to figure out how we react to different foods, right? What does our blood sugar do? And there are a couple of unfortunate findings, I think, that you realized that I guess you kind of suspected already that was the case.
Yes. This year I've been in a journey to optimize my health, metabolism, and all the things, and I kind of have an idea what was going on.
Yes. So we ran this experiment over a couple of weeks and tried to kind of eat the same foods. Now, here's the thing. Even though we ate the same foods, I ate significantly more, usually, of the same food. And even so, some of those findings were incredibly interesting. And today we're going to walk you through some of those findings. We're going to discuss what foods, I guess, we just cannot really have very often because they wreak havoc with our blood sugar. What are some of the highest triggers? What it really means from a health perspective. I mean, why bother wearing a CGM? Why bother, monitoring your blood sugar? We talk about that, and maybe some of the lessons learned and how we...
Lessons learned is more like a man. Really? I cannot eat that?
Yes. We'll talk about all of that. So maybe let's start out with the first experiment, which was, I think, the biggest bummer for you, and that is sourdough bread. I talked about sourdough in a previous episode because everyone says, well, sourdough is healthy. It's unlike regular bread, and it's, you can have that. And we use different types of sourdough. We used whole einkorn, we used kamut, we used regular wheat, of course, organic, double fermented, the whole 9 yards. I mean, as good as you can make it, but nonetheless, first experiment, just regular sourdough bread, which, you've baked frequently in the past couple of months. Really, when did you start making sourdough?
That was 2 years ago.
2 years ago. Well, it's been a while, and so we've had occasionally sourdough and regular sourdough, and we obviously tried it at different days. But just one thing that I picked out here is it caused a peak in blood sugar, in Kathy's blood sugar, of 202 milligrams per deciliter. So if you think about it, regular blood sugar, fasting blood sugar is what, around between 75 to maybe 90 or so. Kathy's peaked to 202 milligram per deciliter. That was a significant spike. And I think that's the other nuance. It's not just about the peak itself, but how long does it stay elevated. And in the case of Levels Health, they treat everything above 110 as above range. And so Kathy's blood sugar remained elevated above target for over 2 hours, 130 minutes. That's a fairly long spike and a fairly high spike. Now, it wasn't a 202 for the entire 130 minutes, but it was above the 110 range, right? Mine, on the other hand, and again, when Kathy ate 2 slices, I probably ate 6. And mine only peaked to 150 and only stayed elevated for about 80 minutes, so just over an hour, indicating that I respond to sourdough
much better than me.
Much better than you do. And there are a couple of reasons for that. We'll talk as well. We talk about difference in gender, in menstrual cycle, in lean muscle mass, and all of those things. But that was, 52 milligrams per deciliter higher. So let's zoom out a little bit and look at some of the top categories that caused spikes for us, because there were some overlaps, but also some differences. For you, sourdough was on top of the list.
I cannot even having, and this is something that you haven't mentioned, we had protein before.
Yes, even with that, it didn't make a difference.
I eat every day 3 eggs with some sort of, either red meat or what else do I do? Bacon or sometimes salmon, smoked salmon. So I always load my plate on protein, and then immediately after, we had 2 slices of bread, and it was terrible for me. So not even having my protein before was helping me to have a lower...
To blunt that spike, yes. And we talk about strategies on how you can blunt your blood sugar response here as well. But yeah, sourdough was number 1 for Kathy. Curry, like Masaman curry, which means rice. And there was probably, if I had to guess, some sweetener in that curry as well, together with the rice. That was number 2. High-intensity CrossFit sessions caused also a significant spike, but those are not the same spikes, or they don't have the same implications from a health perspective. We'll talk about that as well. But nonetheless, high-intensity exercise, spike. Sourdough discard crepes, which is, again, goes back to sourdough. And then the last one, I noted it as a charcuterie plate with carbs. That was really... the sourdough bread, again, was the carb component of that.
It was I made a sourdough French bread.
Yes. So sourdough and rice, no bueno for you. For me, the absolute highest spike was... We need to interrupt this episode for a quick shout out to our sponsor, OneSkin, because let's be honest, nobody wants the skin cells checking out early. It's called cell senescence, when your cells basically start acting old and sluggish. And OneSkin's OS1 peptide is clinically proven to help slow that down. Plus, it's free of those nasty chemicals you'd rather not have hanging around. If you're ready to give your skin some extra love, head over to oneskin.co, that's ONESKIN.co, and use code MKUMMER for 15% off. Now back to our regular scheduled program before any more cells decide to retire. An intimate activity, I'm going to call it that way, because our little one is sitting right here. That caused a spike of 188, I think it's here. Yeah, 188 milligrams per deciliter. So apparently I was under a lot of stress. My body needed to mobilize glucose.
Why do I have the same? I know.
You had only 150. On the same day, your blood sugar only went to 150.
Okay.
And it stayed only elevated for 40-45 minutes. So not a big deal. And again, we'll talk about activity-induced spikes. But that was, for me, number 1. Number 2 was rice. And again, there was one time it was rice combined with chicken before and avocado and stuff. So again, fat and protein preloaded, and then rice after, still caused a dramatic spike for me. Do we have the actual number here?
Of what?
The rice. Here. Is it me? Yeah, Mike. So at 178. I mean, it's not super terrible, but it stayed up for 3 hours. In fact, maybe even a little longer. So we had it for dinner. Once a month or so, we have that curry for dinner. And it was up and down, up and down, up and down for half of the night. Similar to what you experienced with the sourdough pizza. So rice, and maybe also in combination with whatever sweetener is in there, could be honey, could be just regular sugar, not good for me. Same with curry. Again, just rice in general. And then we had the sourdough. But the sourdough, again, for me, was a much more moderate spike, which indicates that I'm better at handling the starches or the carbs from the sourdough. Now, there are obviously other implications with wheat, with grains.
Oh my God, it just occurred to me. Does it have to do with you being from Europe? That you guys, if we go back many years ago, you guys have been making that from scratch. I don't know, maybe it's in your...
maybe not the rice, but the bread for sure.
No, I'm talking about the bread.
Yeah, the bread. And we'll talk about those differences here in a little bit. But yes, that could absolutely be a factor. I think it's also muscle mass, but again, we'll talk about that.
Oh.
So how much carb buffering or glucose buffering capacity do I have? But here the key point for me really is, exercise, be it late night or,
Keep looking at the camera.
Keep looking at the camera while I'm looking at both kids too. So, activity in the room or in the gym had a dramatic impact on my blood sugar response. And and this to the same extent really as some of the carb heavy meals. But again, there's a difference between those two. But overall, I think even with a significant, there are some meals where I had like 250 grams of carbs or so, and I still responded somewhat okay to that, which is good.
Yeah, I think for me, they were like sourdough rice, I think.
Rice was not good for you. Potatoes were good for...
Sweet potatoes. We did sweet potatoes and sweet plantains.
Yes,
those were a good response.
So let's talk about maybe what's the difference between, obviously, just because you react to that in a certain way, I react to carbs in a certain way, doesn't necessarily mean everyone, it's the same between men and women, but there are differences. Obviously, you mentioned already maybe genetic variation. I'm from Europe. Your ancestors at some point came from Europe too, but
we probably eat more seasonal fruit, like papaya, mango, all those tropical nice fruit. And maybe but I tried a mandarin and it was really high.
Mandarin wasn't good for you either.
No, but apples are really good for me.
Berries,
like apples, berries I can eat. They don't spike my blood sugar, but
But I think between you and I, there are two main differences. One is obviously our gender, right? Your menstrual cycle, you notice that leading up to your period,
yes.
no?
Leading up to my period, which is the luteal phase, I was not, my insulin sensitivity was
lower, so you had higher spikes, no?
Higher spikes.
Yeah, so take that into account. If you're a menstruating woman, depending on the time of the month, you might respond to the same food differently, and it might make sense to eat differently.
But
right?
that's a fact.
Mm-hmm.
That's really because I've been talking with other women that have a glucose monitor or have been wearing one of those, and there is a proof that leaning towards when we are on the luteal phase, we have a lower insulin sensitivity.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The other thing, I think the difference between us is lean muscle tissue. The more muscle tissue you have, the more muscles and the liver store glycogen. Glycogen is the storage molecule, so to say, of glucose. And you're very strong too. You're a butch. Congratulations.
You always say that.
But, the more muscle tissue you have, the more you can buffer that glucose that you get from the carbohydrates. So that's probably why my blood sugar responds a little bit different, because I can store more of what I consume in my muscle tissue, and it doesn't stay in my blood sugar for too long.
Okay.
So that's probably, and what does it mean is, the more lean muscle tissue you build, the better your blood glucose response likely is. And that's probably also one of the reasons why you started lifting more, right? So.
Well, I've always been lifting heavy weights because that's my passion. That's what I like.
Yeah.
But there has been some changes in the last year or two. And now I'm focusing even more on just lifting heavy, lower reps, just heavier.
Yeah.
And doing less HIIT workouts.
Yes. Yeah.
So the new program that I'm trying is only once a week of a HIIT program. I'm walking more. So I think maybe in a few months we can try again the monitor and test again.
See if it made a difference. Obviously other lifestyle factors like sleep, stress, and your gut microbiome also play a role into how your body responds. And speaking of stress, because chronic stress is already one thing that can, and we've noticed it, that can elevate your blood sugar. It's not going to get a huge spike, but it's just a little bit elevated. So speaking of stressors, exercise obviously is a stressor, sauna bathing is a stressor, cold plunging is a stressor. I've noticed spikes in blood sugar when jumping into the cold plunge. I've obviously noticed.
I didn't test that.
You didn't test it?
Mm-mm.
No, I it's only maybe 30 or 40 milligrams per deciliter of an increase, but nonetheless, my body responds to that stress. But here is the thing. Those spikes are different from food-induced spikes, mainly because it's not extra glucose that you're consuming, it's glucose that your body is mobilizing. The liver, in most cases, releases glycogen in response to that stressor because your body thinks, hey, we need energy to fight or to run away. But if you don't use it, it gets reabsorbed and all is good. And in fact, over time, by exposing yourself to those stressors, exercise, cold plunge, sauna, bathing, you actually get more sensitive, more insulin, improve your insulin sensitivity. So your blood sugar management becomes better over time. So those are not issues. If you see a spike, if you wear a CGM and you go exercise and you see a spike, and don't freak out, that's perfectly fine. What would you say if someone says, should I wear a CGM? Is it worth it? An average person, what would you tell them?
I think it's worth it. Now that I've tried it, I think it's worth it.
Yeah.
You wanna, if you are like us, then you want the data. I think is, just experiment. I would actually like to experiment with sourdough, but milling our own grains.
You can't let the sourdough be,
No.
huh?
No, because I have a friend that she says that
it makes a difference.
It makes a difference. So it would be a good, thing to try.
Yeah.
But I think, having the data, experiment, see what it works, what it doesn't. Now, I have to say and be truly honest. Without the CGM, I don't feel that I'm, how do you say that, accountable?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm like, whatever. I'll eat it.
You hold yourself more accountable if you wear a CGM.
If I wear it, I know.
You see the damage.
I see the damage, exactly. If I'm not, I've noticed that, I'm just going to eat it. But that was a lot, towards my menstruation days, right? So my hormones are all over the place and I just want to eat more or whatever it is. And I feel like in that phase of my period, I don't want to take care of myself kind of thing. But then I go back and I'm like, okay, I want to do all the things right.
Yeah.
So I feel like it helped me to make myself accountable,
Yeah, I think it's good to say, it's not that carbs are inherently bad, that a blood sugar spike is inherently bad, but I think it's worth finding out what foods do you respond better to versus not. I mean, if you're on a carnivore diet, I would say, maybe don't worry about a CGM, because if you're not consuming carbs, your blood sugar is likely going to be more stable. Now, there are still stress and other factors that can influence your blood sugar levels, but food is probably, the most critical one. And if you don't eat carbs, then don't worry. But if you consume carbs, which, I don't think is necessarily wrong, humans are meat-eating omnivores, we eat what we find, right? But finding out what do you respond better to, because if you can choose between, if you like an apple and a banana, equally.
Yeah, and mandarin, because bananas, I could not eat a banana, but a mandarin I really like because I can travel with it,
right.
The banana too. But I don't know, I feel like between an apple and mandarin, I would go for the mandarin. But then I found out that I don't handle it well. Then I'm gonna go for the apple.
Just go with the apple, it's the same thing more or less, but you get a better response and it's likely gonna more positively impact your health over time. So finding out what foods you respond better to is definitely worth it. Just understanding that certain things cause, like the sourdough or the rice for us at night, that's having those carb spikes or those glucose spikes for several hours before going to bed is going to disrupt your sleep. So it's not only bad from an insulin sensitivity perspective, it's going to disrupt your sleep. That means you're less restored, it just has a cascading effect, and that's something you can avoid. If you say, you know what, instead of having that curry, if I really want it at night, why don't we have it, have an early lunch and then we go for a walk? Speaking of, what can you do to better manage your blood sugar response, even if you don't cut out specific foods that cause spikes. Exercising right after. Obviously, if you exercise, and if it's only a brisk walk, it doesn't even have to be a high intensity kind of workout or heavy lifting. Just going for a brisk walk means you're going to be utilizing some of that glucose instead of, having it in your bloodstream or then shuttling it back and converting it to fat for long time storage, which is probably the worst thing that you want to do, unless your goal is to gain fat or to become fat. Yeah. So going for a walk is an easy thing. Right?
I did that when we did pizza night. I just started walking on our driveway. I'm like 5 minutes, at least 5 minutes, 10 minutes maybe. I did it up and down just to lower a little bit, before going to bed because it was high. We don't eat just a slice of pizza. We're going to eat, 3 or 4.
We eat it all.
Or all. And
I think number 2 is, focus on building lean muscle tissue. If you have more muscles, your blood sugar response is going to be better. And
That's my goal.
Yeah, and that's a good thing anyway, because more muscles are always good. Don't have to look like the Hulk, but, muscle tissue is a good thing. And then, preloading with carbs and fat. Now, you've seen that didn't quite work for some of those carbs.
What do you mean, load with
like
carbs?
Have a lot of protein and fat and then have the carbs at the end?
I think you said it the other way.
Preload? I said, anyway.
Yeah, you said preload with carbs and fat.
Oh, no, that's not. Don't preload with carbs. That's the exact opposite of what you want to do.
I'm like, what?
You're going to have you should have protein and fat first and then have your carbs at the end, which for most people works in many cases.
For me, it didn't.
What it did for me is I noticed, and that kind of tricked the levels app a little bit, because when I ate a ton of protein and fat before and then I had a ton of carbs, my blood sugar spike would come with a delay of about 2 hours. Most of the apps that we've used,
yeah.
they give your meal a score based on your blood sugar response within the next 2 hours after consumption. Most of my spikes, when I ate a lot of protein first, occurred past that 2 hour cutoff, and so the meal looked pretty good, got a high score. But since I didn't do anything else after, that spike must have been caused by. But nonetheless, it's going to blunt it a little bit. Might not be dramatic. It's going to delay it potentially.
Mine, it just...
For you, it did not?
My body was like, nope.
Nope. Did not work for you. Well, it might not work for you either. So, but worth experimenting, trying to find out. And then obviously, pay attention to your hormone cycle, especially if you're a woman. And maybe, adjust your food intake, your carb intake to the time of the month.
What I've heard is that just do it on days of workout, and not that type of carbs, more the types that are, that didn't spike as much, like sweet potatoes, or sweet plantains, not just, sourdough.
Yes, correct. And with that, I guess we're going to wrap it up. The key takeaway really was that, we all respond differently to different foods. It's worth finding out what you respond to well, what you don't, and then maybe avoid.
But I have a question.
Yes.
Do you think it's worth having the C?
Yes, I absolutely think it's worth, not to freak out, not to stress yourself, but to learn, to understand how your body is reacting. And the cool thing really is, once you kind of correlate what you see in the data with how you feel, then you can really tell. We can tell when we eat carbs and we get that, slump and low in energy and kind of like, I want to take a nap. You don't need to be a rocket science to kind of correlate that with your carb intake. So, but it helps you really fine tune what you feel or what you think you feel and give you a better understanding. And I think regardless or not, if you have already diabetes, obviously you need to do something about it. But even if you don't, if you think like you're metabolically healthy, I would encourage you to just wear a CGM for a little bit, only for a couple of weeks, and find out how your lifestyle impacts your blood sugar, because blood sugar goes right back to insulin sensitivity and insulin resistance. And that's really at the root cause of most metabolic disease, including Alzheimer's, diabetes, obviously type 2 diabetes, cancer, stroke, cardiovascular. All of that goes back to inflammation triggered by insulin resistance, and that's something you absolutely want to avoid, and it's very easy to avoid. And if you want to learn more about the Levels Health that we used, I think it's a great app. It's super easy to track it. You can take a picture of your food. I
love that.
Right? And
taking a picture and with AI, I think they use, and
it captures the food, breaks it down, how much you ate.
And I know you don't like the macro counting, but I was like, how much protein I have to fit in,
I'm okay with counting protein if you want to count something, but don't track your calories. Don't count your calories. Don't do that. We talked about that. But yes, check it out. We're going to have some links down below in the show notes if you want to learn more about Levels Health. A great app. I think they support both the Dexcom as well as the Abbott's Freestyle. I really like the Dexcom because it's, you don't need to scan anything, it streams. And it's a great tool. Check it out. I highly encourage you, give it a try and learn a little bit more about how your body responds to food, stress, intimacy, workouts, and anything in between.
And don't mix up your monitors like you did.
Oh yeah, if you do it both, make sure you really know which one goes to what account. Otherwise,
he played chess with our monitors, and then we didn't know which one it was.
Let's not do that again.
But this was fun.
Yeah, share it with someone who might benefit from watching this or listening to this, and let us know. What do you think? If you're watching this on a platform or consuming that on a platform that supports comments. Let us know, what do you think about CGMs? Have you tried it? What are your findings? And until
Next time.
next time.